Hey everyone, CoolKid here, and welcome back to Reading Your Hot Takes. I released 2 high-effort videos recently, so it's time to fire up the slot mill again. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is a show where I read over a bunch of comments that I received on the prior episode and go over people's opinions about the game that might be a bit more out there. If you want to leave your own hot take, remember to reply to the pinned comment, as I'll be checking specifically there for future episodes. I also want to clarify that this episode is not going to contain takes from the prior episode's comments like normal. I had a big batch that I wanted to get through in episode 3, but I only got through about half of it. So for this video, we're going to be finishing off those takes, because I felt like those people deserved their chance to have me respond to what they had to say. Okay, not too complicated, so let's get right into it. First up, people don't complain enough about Void Sling and the removal of Void Dash. Void Dash was an infinitely smoother and faster way to move, and there was no reason to remove it. It should be a choice between Void Sling and Void Dash at the very least. Okay, so this one is a surprisingly touchy subject. I know that a lot of people have very strong opinions about this. And to make something clear, I don't personally mind Void Sling, but I kind of feel like it didn't really deliver on what it was supposed to do. So, for those who didn't play back when Void Dash was a thing, or maybe you just kind of don't remember because it's been gone for 4 years now almost, I think. Essentially, you would just go straight in a line, just straight depending on the direction key that you were holding, and it was really fast, but it was very rigid. Like when this person says that it was a smoother way to move, I don't agree with that. It was a faster way to move. That is objectively true, because you could spam the shit out of it. But I wouldn't call it smoother. It was a very rigid way to move around the map. And so, it seemed like the idea with Void Sling was to kind of carry your momentum through the dash. But I feel like they kind of failed at that, or at least it's not really as prominent as it should be. Like, when you Void Sling, you still decelerate enough by the time you're at the end of the sling that it doesn't really carry your momentum in the way that I feel like they were kind of pitching when they first released it in Angels. Now, I will say, personally, I am fine with Void Sling. I don't hate it, I just don't really feel like it did a great job at what they were trying to do with it. I do know that a lot of people miss Void Dash, especially for Eidolons, because it was super fast, and I completely understand that, but when it comes to like the Void Sling versus Void Dash debate, I think they smoothed over a lot of what made Void Sling not nearly as good. They made it much faster. It goes farther, if memory serves, than Void Dash did. You have directional Void Sling now, which was not a thing at launch. I think they did a decent job of making it feel better than it did on release, but I think ultimately this comes down to like a difference in feel. Now, the question of whether or not Void Dash is superior is obviously just a matter of personal preference. I know plenty of people who think that Sling is the better way to move, and like I said, personally, I'm kind of indifferent about it. I've gotten used to Sling, and I'm fine with that. But when it comes to a choice between Void Sling and Void Dash, I don't really know how they would actually accomplish that in terms of like, would it be like a toggle in your focus tree? Would it be like a thing in the settings? Because there's not really any movement options I'm aware of that are treated like that. And also, Void Sling was meant to solve real problems that existed with Void Dash. Like I said, it was super rigid, the distance was really fixed. In more tight tile sets, it was super awkward to use, at least in my experience. Incredibly good in open worlds or more open spaces, but in the more tight corridors, I found that sometimes you would accidentally like mantle onto something or what have you because it was so stringent. So I feel like Void Sling was made to solve real problems with Void Dash. I think the problem was just that Void Sling introduced more problems than it fixed. I feel like the idea of replacing Void Dash outright does kind of make sense in terms of, like I said, the issues I outlined earlier with it being so rigid. But the way that Void Sling went about it didn't really do that great. Personally, I wish that Void Sling would carry your momentum through the sling more. I think that would be a fun way to make it kind of fulfill its original vision of, you know, a sling, where you sling yourself through it and then you carry that momentum forward. But as it stands, Void Sling just kind of is a slower Void Dash in a lot of ways. I think that it kind of feels smoother because of the, like, acceleration and deceleration throughout the process of the sling, but I don't know. This is one of those things where I ultimately think it's just a matter of feel. I wouldn't complain if there was an option to choose between Void Dash and Void Sling, but I don't think that this is one of the, like, this specific thing says there was no reason to remove it. I think it was completely reasonable to try and improve upon Void Dash, and if they thought they had an objectively better version, then they weren't going to keep Void Dash in the game, right? I think the problem is that Void Sling just didn't really pan out, even after all of its iterations. Again, this is a matter of preference more than anything. If you prefer Void Dash, then more power to ya, and I would not complain at all if people were given the option to choose it again. I think I'm in a weird camp with this, though, because I'm also one of the people that doesn't think wall running should come back, which is a very unpopular opinion, but I personally think that wall bouncing blends into the game's movement much better, and I don't really like how rigid wall running is. Kind of like an adjacent topic, but I know I'm in the minority with a lot of this stuff. Like I said, I'm fine with Void Sling. I know a lot of people would prefer the return of Void Dash, and I'm the same way with wall bouncing versus wall running. I feel like wall running doesn't really fit into how the game's movement actually works, but wall bouncing fits in fine. So I know this take doesn't mention wall running at all, I'm just kind of drawing the parallel. To sum up my thoughts on this, I understand why DE removed Void Dash, because they were trying to make a successor that improved on Void Dash's faults. I think it makes sense to remove something if you think you have a better version. The problem is that Void Sling was not the better version, and I think it led to a lot of friction, not just in terms of getting used to the new way that it felt when we had Void Dash for so long. How long did... I think it would have been 6 years? Because, yeah, War Within was in 2016, right? So I think it would have been we had it 6 years, because it was 2022. Shit, dude, Void Sling has been in the game for nearly as long as Void Dash was. It's been 4 years now. We're getting up there. But I personally think that if they were to bring it back or make it a toggle, that's totally fine. I don't personally hate that it's gone, and I understand why they would have gotten rid of it if they thought they were making an improvement. So that's just kind of my thought process with this. But again, no hate to people who prefer Void Dash, and I would be totally fine with it returning. Okay, next up, a hot take I shared before but with extra context. The second dream should probably be locked behind the Sedna junction. Not only is there something about the idea of going into the sentient plot after going all the way through the system, but it would also be a good first step towards untying the continuity knot that is Alad V's story. Okay, so I disagree with this for multiple reasons, but I first want to get hung up on the Alad V thing. Why would moving this to a later point in the story be better for Alad V's continuity? If we move this to the Sedna junction, then necessarily it would be right next to the Eris junction, and implying they haven't changed it, I am pretty sure the Eris junction is what gives you Patient Zero, which would mean that you can play Patient Zero or the second dream in either order, which would just make things even more confusing by my estimation. Like, yes, it is weird that by the time you, get to the Ropa Low list, Alad is normal again, and you can see the infested scars and stuff on his face from the time he was Mutalist Alad V, and it's just never acknowledged how he escaped that. But I feel like moving this to the Sedna junction wouldn't really solve any continuity problems with Alad, because you're putting it at the same point that his Mutalist story begins. So I don't know, I don't really understand the rationale with that. As for the second dream just being moved to that point in general, 100% disagree, and in fact, maybe this is the real hot take, it is way too late in the progression already. A criticism of Warframe that I have heard for a long time, and that frankly I actually agree with, is that its story takes way too long to actually start. The second dream is basically the beginning of the real story of the game. It actually introduces the protagonist of the story, right, on some level. And we get there at Neptune. I believe it is the Neptune junction that grants access to it. So it takes this absurd amount of time, considering that there's only, a few destinations left after that, to finally start the actual story. And a lot of people express what I think is totally valid frustration with that. When I was doing my streams for beating Warframe in a day, I felt like I was making no progress because my live split, where I was tracking all of the major milestones, was set up purely around quests. And for the first, half of the stream, I was doing basically none of them. Progressing through the planets was all I was doing. The game was almost entirely devoid of a plot at that point, because there were huge swaths where I was doing nothing. There were no quests or anything like that. Narratively, I should clarify, I was doing nothing. I was just moving through the planets. if anything, the second dream should be introduced earlier, because it's like the first major narrative hook that really gets people invested in the plot, is because it's such an interesting direction for the story to go, right? I started playing in 2014, when the game first came to Xbox. It was like September or October of 2014. Little CoolKid was in middle school at the time. I realistically probably shouldn't have been playing this game, but you know, you're allowed to with your parents' permission, so it was totally fine. But when I was playing through this game back then, I remember when the second dream released, and the way that it handles things is so masterful, because it's always like a question that's kind of just sitting in the back of the head of the player, and it's one of those things where you don't really consciously think about it a ton, where it's just like, okay, what am I playing as, like, exactly? Like, what's going on here? What is a Tenno, necessarily? We don't really have any idea for the longest time. It's like, are these different individual people? Are we like aliens? You don't really know, but the game never really calls a ton of attention to it. So, at least I just kind of ignored the question. I was like, well, there's probably something there, but I don't really feel like there's a point in trying to figure it out if the game isn't trying to tell me. And so, when you get to the second dream and you have the operator introduced, and some of what I think are like the coolest concepts in science fiction in terms of transference into the Warframes, and the entire concept of what the second dream actually is, where they'd wake up as the Warframe, and they sort of thought that they were the Warframe. And there's some elaboration from the Drifter and the 1999 Kims on this as well, that like, animation sets canonically exist because the mannerisms of the people that became the Warframes are adopted by the people that link to them, and I assume that's how they know how to use their abilities and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot of intrigue there in terms of like who you're actually playing as and the mechanism by which you control the Warframes, and it kicks off such a phenomenal narrative arc. I still think that the original Second Dream trilogy of, I think it was technically called the War Within arc, but the Second Dream, the War Within, and the Sacrifice, I still think are like those are the three most interesting quests in the entire game from a lore perspective, because they give you so much insight into, I don't know how to put it, I guess, like science fiction concepts that haven't really been explored that much by other franchises, for one. They're very interesting to look at from that lens, but also in terms of like the details of how the world actually works, that previously, up until that point, the game just kind of isn't acknowledging, but now you're learning like, okay, so the Tenno aren't the Warframes, they're these children that control them, and then, okay, well, the Warframes were people, but they got turned into Warframes with a specific strain of infestation, and the War Within adds some really freaky lore about how the Orokin were immortal, which is something we know about up to that point in the story, it's been mentioned, but the mechanism of continuity and the Yuvan Theater and all that stuff is really interesting to learn about. Those quests, like, I swear there's a reason I'm bringing all of this up. Those quests really sink good narrative hooks into the player. They make them much more curious, or at least they made me much more curious about the world, because it finally gave you something where it really felt like you had a major question answered, like there was really some meat on the bones of the story. But because it's so late into the game, lots of people still are under the impression, from what I've seen, that the game doesn't have a plot, or that the plot isn't important. I think it was Josh Strife Hayes' video about it from a couple of years ago now, where I think he even said that in his video, was that it didn't seem like the plot was a focus in Warframe. And the truth is, the plot is a focus, it's just not the focus for a really long time. I think it took me probably something in the ballpark of like 8 hours, maybe, before I got to that point, and that was me playing constantly. I'd have to rewatch the VODs, but it took me a while, and I'm not saying there is no narrative up to this point. Like, we have, you know, Heart of Deimos and stuff like that, that establishes some narratives before we get to the big reveal. But so much of the pieces of Warframe start to come together with the Second Dream, and they expand on those ideas in really interesting ways in future quests. And I think that, if anything, it is way too late, because a lot of players will check out of the story before ever even getting to that point, or if they're there for the narrative, or doing like a lore-focused playthrough where they want to experience that stuff, they might just be under the impression the game has no plot, period. And on top of that, It also has the tragedy of making it so that people are probably going to have the operator spoiled for them way before they see it for themselves, because they have other players they'll encounter, or friends that play the game, or access to the internet, and they'll see stuff like that. I remember when I was in high school, my younger brother Heston started playing the game, and he asked me for help with something. This was way before crossplay, so I shit you not, I just took the Xbox controller from him and helped him with it. It was the original Fortuna quest, which, to be fair, was really hard for something you had to do solo that early in the game. But I remember when I took the controller from him and I was helping him out with it, and he was talking to me about the game, and he was like, yeah, I don't have operator mode yet. And I remember thinking to myself, why do you know about that when you're at Fortuna? You shouldn't know about this yet, period. But obviously he had looked up information about the game when he started playing it, and he had it spoiled for him. I'm not saying that the quest with the second dream should be like the first thing you do. No, there needs to be time for the question of the nature of what is actually happening to sort of percolate in the player's brain before the reveal happens. But I feel like the reveal is just a little too late. And I don't really know how they'd even fix that, because Nata is a prerequisite for proceeding into the second dream, because Hunhao has to have his setup, but Hunhao is on Uranus, so naturally, this quest is immediately after all that. So I don't really know if this is an issue that can even necessarily be fixed without just further streamlining the process of junctions, which makes so much of the planets leading up to the story transient. It's a complicated topic, I guess. To bring it back to the take, because I feel like I've just kind of wandered off at this point, right? I do not think the second dream should be moved, for two reasons. One, the thing with Aladvia, I don't really understand where they're coming from, because that would allow you to play both his pre- and post-infestation stories in either order, which doesn't make sense. But also, I feel like the second dream is the most important narrative catalyst that the player encounters, and moving it to be even later in the game will cause people to check out of the narrative or check out of the game even more often. It also gives more time for the events of the quest to be spoiled, and I think that sucks, because the reveal of the second dream is one of the greatest plot twists I have ever bore witness to in a video game, period. Playing that for the first time and not knowing what was coming was a genuinely magical experience, and I hate that that stuff is robbed from players. Now, this is not related to the take. I just want to say this because it bothers me. I do not think you should be allowed to do Duviri before you do the second dream, because the way Duviri reveals transference does not work. Compared to the way the second dream pulls it off, the fact that Duviri just kind of glosses over it, and then suddenly the Drifter is controlling a Warframe, not only doesn't fully explain what is happening, but reveals one of the coolest parts of the story in a way that is super fucking lame. The reveal of transference in the second dream, where you're walking into the reservoir, and then the operator falls out of the golden cradle, and the Warframe collapses to the ground, and it switches perspective, and you crawl over to them and put your hand on them, and it picks you up, is just so well executed. Versus the Drifter, like, holding out his hand, and then suddenly he's the Warframe. I hate it. I don't think it works, and Duviri should not try and handle a reveal that I do not think they can top compared to its execution in the second dream. So, again, this take did not mention this, and really I am just kind of off in a completely different zip code at this point with what I'm talking about. But I do not like the way Duviri handled revealing transference, period. If you want my opinion, I feel like the Undercroft and all of that shit shouldn't have even been in the quest. It should have been totally Drifter focused, so that that side of the story wasn't spoiled. But Duviri was gonna be an alternate start, so they added all this Undercroft shit to make it like an alternate tutorial for the main game, and it's just a mess. Duviri and its time as an alternate start, I think, marred its quest permanently, but that's a topic for another time. The short of this is, I do not think we should move the second dream, and I do not agree with the reasons outlined here for why this person thinks we should. Okay, next up. Subsuming abilities and the Helminth system needs to be overhauled. Whether it be the massive difference between Airburst and Gloom, or that some frames have abilities that are considered weak to be subsumed over, I feel something needs to be changed with the system somehow. Okay, so this is interesting, because I feel like this person is pointing to what I think is a real problem. The Helminth system has a shit ton of options that are just not worth using. And also, there are a lot of Warframes that have abilities that are just weak enough that they're basically begging to be subsumed over with better options. I think the unfortunate thing about this take is that they aren't really sure how to approach the problem, and that's not a fault of the user here, right? It's not their job to fix the problem, they're just identifying it from the point of view of a player. But I do think that generally when I give feedback, I try to provide a potential solution, even if the developer won't, take that potential solution ultimately. I think it's good to try and work with something there in terms of like, what do you think could be a way to make it work? So when it comes to the Helminth system, I have considered making a video about this topic just in its entirety in terms of the way the Helminth is balanced, but I don't know if I'm ever going to get around to that, honestly, so I'll kind of just say my piece on this here. The Helminth has a problem that's kind of twofold, and this comment describes it accurately. 1. There are a bunch of abilities in the system, but only a narrow slice of them are good enough to use in the majority of cases, so much so that taking a more niche option can feel punishing because you're foregoing taking a better option. And then the second sort of slice of that is you have abilities on Warframes that are really weak, and so they are subsumed over constantly because they're just not worth keeping. Now, I feel like one of the fundamental things with this is the Helminth system doesn't necessarily need to be perfectly balanced, because if you don't like something, or if you want to play a certain way, then that is ultimately entirely the player's choice. If I don't want to use Nourish, I won't use it, that kind of thing. However, I do not think that if I don't like it, I won't use it is a valid way to shut down all future criticism of a system, because you can still choose to not engage with certain elements of a system because you don't personally like them, but identify that those elements of the system are still a problem. To that end, the Helminth system should never have allowed straight-up damage abilities, just period. I think that was its biggest mistake, because if you look at the most popular subsumes, historically, they have almost always been damage. Nourish is a damage boost. It also provides the utility of energy regen, which is a big part of why it's the most popular Helminth ability, absolutely, but it is still a damage boost. Roar is a damage boost. Xata's is a damage boost. Eclipse is a damage boost, even if it got turbo nerfed off the face of the planet. A lot of damage boosts are the most popular subsumes. People just kind of brainlessly put Roar on basically everything nowadays. I see people like all the time when I'm talking about stuff on stream, or I'm showing off a build of mine and talking about it because someone asked, I almost always get the question, why didn't you just put on Roar? And I see this literally like every time I do it. Someone will ask why Roar isn't on my build. And like, I get it. If there's an ability that someone is finding they are not using very often, just take the more damage button. It's a pretty simple solution to the problem. Some people are also, they bend over backwards to fit Roar in because they're so used to having it that they want to drop whatever they can. If anything seems even slightly not immediately useful, they'll get rid of it for Roar. And I think that having straight up damage abilities in the system promotes that approach, is that if there's something you're even kind of not using, get rid of it. Roar is more damage for literally everything. That's the answer. And if you want my honest opinion, it never should have been allowed into the system. Same with Xata's, especially same with Nourish. They shouldn't have been allowed in. Now, I will make one exception for Smite and Shock Trooper, because they also require a mod, and I think that additional level of investment serves to make them painful enough to equip that they don't feel like the right answer, because not only are you sacrificing an ability, even if you might not be using it, you're now sacrificing a mod slot, and chances are you were definitely using that before. So it's not as easy of an answer if you also have to take an augment for an ability to provide the effect you want, so I feel like that's a little less egregious. Nourish, Roar, and Xata's I think are kind of like the big three, but there are definitely others that really are a cut above the rest. Gloom is a classic example, not just because it's a source of lifesteal, which is a surprisingly rare stat in this game, but also its slow is super good. Pillage is incredibly strong, not only because it gives you shields, but it removes armor, it removes enemy shields, it status cleanses, it's just an incredibly powerful button, and it's super fast. You look at Breach Surge. Breach Surge is really popular for crowd control and things like that because of its deals damage with Surge Sparks, it blinds enemies, that kind of thing. I don't really know if I would call Breach Surge, like, overpowered, and I'm not really trying to accuse any of these abilities of being outright overpowered, aside from the 3 that I previously outlined, but it's got a lot of stuff that it does, right? There's a lot of other Helminth options as well that definitely excel to an extent that other ones just don't line up with, even recent ones. I mean, you look at Bright Bonnet got added to the system recently. Bright Bonnet is super good because it's strength and energy, and it also restores energy through channeled abilities. I do not think Bright Bonnet is a problematic ability. In fact, I think it's a really interesting way to allow channeled abilities to still gain energy from a subsume, but it's still obviously a cut above the rest of a lot of other subsumes that might have been added, you know, in the time before. And I think that's also one of the peculiar parts of the Helminth system, honestly, is that now every frame has to provide a subsume, so then it's like, are they designing frames with that in mind? Like, are kits being built around, okay, this ability can't be too good because it's gonna enter the Helminth system? Is that like a thing they actively think about? I'm not really sure. There are so many Helminth abilities. Like, there are plenty that I think are good and niche enough that they're not a problem, because I feel like that's ultimately what the Helminth should be. The idealized version of the Helminth is that you pick an ability that is somewhat niche, but does a specific thing you need for your build to work, and you should also, necessarily, feel the loss of whatever you had to replace. It should not be an easy answer, like putting Roar over like Foley's 4, for example, which, by the way, I'm not taking that shit off, the balloons are funny as fuck. But regardless, it shouldn't feel like an easy answer to get rid of, like, Foley's 4 or Noko's 3, which, again, I'm not taking that shit off, I love chudling mode. But when you have straight-up damage abilities like Nourish, like Roar, like Zata's, it's just the answer. And I think that's kind of a problem. If there's ever an ability that you're not using, it shouldn't just feel like the correct answer is to get rid of it for more damage. So I feel like in a sort of idealized version of the system, you would feel the loss of an ability severely for getting rid of it, and then the thing that you take would not be the answer all the time, it would be to enable a specific niche strategy. A great example of this is a frame I play a lot of, that being Lavos. Whenever you take a subsume on Lavos, you massively feel the loss of that ability, even if you weren't really using it that much. Take, for example, Ophidian Bite. If you're not using Ophidian Bite's augment, Swift Bite, you're probably not casting it that much, because Ophidian Bite, while not a bad ability, doesn't have a ton of utility outside of healing yourself. But because of Lavos' elemental infusion system, if you get rid of it, you lose access to 4 status effects that you could have infused otherwise. So if you get rid of it, you really feel the loss of Ophidian Bite, especially because you lose access to Toxin, Viral, Gas, and Corrosive, which are all really important for Lavos to have access to depending on what he's doing. And it's the same for all of Lavos' abilities. Not only are you losing the ability itself, you're losing the utility of the element it grants you, and I think that was a great way to balance the Helminth out on him, because there are absolutely Helminth abilities that are super good on Lavos. Sickening Pulse is fantastic on Lavos, but you are going to feel the loss of whatever you dropped to take Sickening Pulse. It is not an easy decision to get rid of an ability, and you are going to feel its absence in your gameplay loop. But you are able to use a niche ability like Sickening Pulse to augment Lavos' gameplay and open up a new way to experience the frame's kit. And to me, that is the ideal vision of the Helminth system, is that you will feel the loss of that ability. It will narrow your playstyle away from the sort of normal way that you would play the frame, but the new ability that you have will open up a niche that will allow you to experience the frame's kit in a new context. And when things like Roar exist, and when weak abilities like Reroot exist, the choice just becomes obvious. Just get rid of the thing you're not using for more damage. Now, when it comes to solving the problem, it's tough to say, because if you want my opinion, these abilities just shouldn't have been added. But now that they're in the system, I don't really think they can be taken away, but at the same time, I don't think they should get the Eclipse treatment either, because if they just nerf them to the point they're not usable, that's not really gonna make anybody happy. When it comes to these abilities in particular, a nerf to their numbers wouldn't fix the problem, in my opinion, because either they're still gonna get used because there's still more damage, or they get so over-nerfed they are just worthless and not worth taking. This will be a controversial opinion. there is one ability that I think could be nerfed in a way that is sensible and would still piss people off, but would balance it better. I think you could break Nourish in half and it would still be a top tier subsume. If you broke the viral damage and the energy gain into 2 different subsumes, and you had one that gave you the viral damage and maybe like the viral retaliation effect or something, and then you had one that gave you the energy increase, even as 2 separate abilities, they would both still be incredibly independently good. You just now wouldn't get access to both the damage and the utility of Nourish all at once. You would have to pick between its 2 forms. Now, again, I don't think that that's a solution people would love, because people generally do not like their power being taken from them in this game, or any game for that matter, and I get that. That's not like a thing that is necessarily bad. But when it comes to the wider question of like, how do we balance this out, I think that there's also a lot of potential in attacking the problem from another angle, that being, what abilities are people getting rid of? And DE actually did this once. There was a patch where they took the, I think it was 6 most replaced abilities, and they buffed them. Now, I hate to say this, the buffs didn't fucking do anything. Like, to put this into perspective, we are all playing in a post-Spectral Scream buff world. If memory serves, Chroma's 1 was buffed in that balance pass, and it's still dog shit. I believe they also buffed Ballistic Battery, and wouldn't you know it, nobody fucking uses it either. I think that the best way to try and balance things out is, instead of looking at what abilities in the system are problematic, because, like, yes, we could nerf Roar, and we could nerf Nourish, and we could nerf Zatas, and whatever else, but they're in the system. The only thing that I think could really serve as a viable solution is to kill the abilities outright, and that's not a great way to handle it. So I think the focus should then shift to what's getting replaced the most, and how can we buff it to try and bring back the idealized version of the system where you feel the loss of whatever you got rid of. If we look at Baruch, for example, Baruch, I imagine for many players, myself included, people will just get rid of Elude, because Elude has a ton of anti-synergies with Baruch's kit. Elude rewards Baruch for dodging things, right? If he's like got the dodge active, stuff will pass through him and reduce his restraint. But Elude just doesn't fit in the rest of Baruch's kit. If you're using your 2, then enemies are asleep, so they're not attacking you, so you're not reducing restraint with Elude. It's not even really helping you because the enemies are asleep. If you're using Desolate Hands, the damage reduction is useless because you dodge things normally. And also, if an enemy is disarmed, they are attacking you way less often, and they have to close the distance to reach you, which means you're dodging less attacks with Elude. Your passive damage reduction from lowering your restraint doesn't even matter if you're dodging attacks with Elude. And for the 4, Serene Storm, if you're killing enemies, then it doesn't matter if you have Elude active because they're dead so they can't attack you. And furthermore, Elude doesn't dodge things while you're attacking, so it doesn't even do anything if you're using the 4. So if you look at Elude, people replace it because it doesn't fit into Baruch's gameplay loop. Because if you're trying to use Elude, you have to bend over backwards to make it work. You have to build into a bunch of range, which is not really something Baruch normally has to do. You have to build into duration and efficiency, which is not something Baruch normally has to do. Hell, building into duration is bad for a lot of people's builds because they want to spam the 2 for restraint reduction. His 2 is actively hostile to Elude, his 3 is actively hostile to Elude, his 4 is actively hostile to Elude, his passive doesn't even really matter if he's using Elude, it just doesn't fit into his gameplay loop. So, I feel like if DE looks at all of this information, then the question needs to be, okay, people are subsuming over Elude because it doesn't fit in with Baruch's gameplay loop. So how do we make Elude fit into the gameplay loop in a way that feels more natural for players, and in a way that's more beneficial to the goals of the rest of his kit, so that if you do opt to remove Elude, you feel the loss more because Elude had utility or some kind of bonus tied to it that felt useful, and you are feeling the loss of the use that it provided you. I think that's ultimately the best way to approach the Helminth system, in terms of, could we nerf abilities in it? Yes, but I think the better solution would be trying to buff things that are being subsumed over to make the loss more steep. Another example, Mesa's Ballistic Battery. For a lot of people, myself included, it gets subsumed over because it doesn't really feel like it fits into the rest of her kit. It's not an ability that is actively hostile to the rest of her kit, like Baruch, But when Mesa has Regulators, which is one of the fastest firing weapons in the entire game, and then you give her an ability that kind of bumps up her damage for one shot, and it's not even that much, it just doesn't really make sense. Now, my personal opinion is, if we were to buff Ballistic Battery, my proposal for that would be make it so that Ballistic Battery, you charge it with damage, but then when you activate it, it gives you a buff based on how long you were charging it or how much you had charged it. The duration would scale with that. And then while the buff is active, it gives you like a 100% flat status chance or something like that. I think that would have a lot of promise as a genuinely useful buff, especially with the augment now, right? If you made the augment's flat crit also apply during that duration, it would be a really good ability. Now, you don't want the duration to be too high, right? Say the duration is, I don't know, like 0.1 at base multiplied by how much you charge the ability. So at base, it would be 10 seconds if you fully charged it or something like that. I feel like it should remain short so that you do actually have to charge the battery, or else you just it's just another cooldown for Mesa to fuck with from time to time, which I don't think would be fun. But that kind of proposal serves to give Mesa a bonus that fits in more with her gameplay loop of having a rapid-fire weapon, which is something that most Mesa players are playing her for, and making it so that if you are going to subsume over it with Nourish or Roar or Zatas or anything like that, you are going to feel that you are losing a powerful buff. And I should clarify, I mentioned it's like 100% flat status or whatever. It doesn't have to be that high. It could be like 50 and scale with strength or something. There are plenty of ways to approach the general idea I'm laying out. This is all just kind of off the top of my head, but the point I'm trying to make, I have been talking about this Helminth ship for like 20 minutes. I need to fucking wrap it up. As this person accurately identifies, the Helminth system has two major problems. There is a gulf between abilities within the system, and there's also a lot of abilities that are not useful, and so they just get overwritten. I think that the gulf within the system is really hard to address, because the only real solution is to nerf the top contenders, and I don't think that people would love that. But if we're going to buff things outside of the system that often get overwritten, I think that would be a great way to try and rein in the top tiers by making things more impactful, for abilities that are in base kits, like I mentioned with the Lewd and Ballistic Battery. I will concede, there is one major problem with this proposal. Niche Helminth abilities are not necessarily any better if this happens. If anything, it will now be harder to justify taking them a lot of the time, because, well, if you're going to get rid of an ability that's now useful when it previously wasn't, then it's an even harder sell to take something that's more niche, like a Decoy or something like that. Which, to be fair, I actually think Decoy is fairly good, but that's besides the point. So, I will concede, that is a problem with my proposal, but I think it would probably be the best way to make everyone happy, as opposed to going through and, executing all of the top tiers, because I really don't think there's any way to fix that system without nerfing them to the point of being unusable, because they're all more damage, and more damage is always helpful, unless it's just not enough to justify the slot. I think that the solution should be what's getting overwritten the most, and how do we buff that in a way that you don't feel like you should just overwrite it because it's not doing anything for you. That's sort of the solution that I would take. Again, I have been talking about this for way too long, so that's just kind of to wrap up. Focus on buffing things that are getting overwritten by Helminth abilities the most, as opposed to nerfing things within the system, because I don't think people would be really happy with that. Okay, next up, Revenant is incredibly overrated. He does nothing else other than staying alive, which most frames, if built well, can do, plus they can do a lot more. Okay, I do agree with this take for the most part, but I do think they are kind of underselling Revenant's effectiveness. Revenant is a complicated situation, for me at least, because his kit has been reduced to one ability, and I don't think that's fair to Revenant, because he can do other stuff. His spin to win with his lasers can be very fun if built into. He has his Reave insta-kill, which I think is a lot of fun. The entire idea that he plays around with his thralls, and having minions that you sort of tactically kill for different bonuses, is really cool. The problem is he has Mesmer Skin, which is probably the single most broken ability they've ever added, because it's a turn off death button. You push it, and you can't die. Do I think Revenant is overrated? Yeah, absolutely. I think that the fact that he is the most played frame and has been for, like, I think a couple of years now, he's up there with Wukong, I think is sad, because I genuinely think that a lot of people are just kind of choosing the path of least resistance, and they get frustrated when they die, so they pick a frame who doesn't die, and then they just kind of rob themselves of the experience of playing anybody else. And a lot of those people don't even take Revenant's kit into consideration. They just get rid of one of his abilities for Roar, and that's just kind of it. They just play him as he buffs his gun and he doesn't die, and that's the end of it. I think that's really unfortunate, because Revenant's playstyle has some cool stuff to it if you want to engage with it. And moreover, all of the other Warframes have a lot of cool stuff in their playstyles if you're willing to put in the work to learn how to survive on them. But I think a lot of people just don't really want to do that, and it's... okay, I feel like I'm kind of aggrandizing when I don't mean to, but I think Warframe broadly has a major problem with the people who play it not understanding the game. And that, to be clear, is generally not their fault. The game does not explain a lot of crucial information that should be explained in terms of how you actually go about approaching your survivability, for example. I think that a lot of people pick Revenant because they don't know how to survive on any other frame because they're not familiar with the mechanics or the intricacies of them. And Warframe has gotten better about explaining these things, like hovering over your shield stat shows you your shield gating stats, for example, and there are tooltips when you die that explain different survivability mods and stuff like that. Like, there is positive movement to try and encourage players to learn the systems, but they're so complicated and on such a frame-to-frame basis that a lot of people just don't want to deal with it. Now, to kind of play devil's advocate here, Warframe doesn't do a great job of explaining this to players. You can find the information if you look for it, but a lot of players won't know to look for it. At the same time, there are also players who know that these things exist but simply do not want to engage with them, so they pick Revenant because he's the easier option. And I think a lot of Warframe players in general will take the path of least resistance in terms of, like, AOE damage is another example of this kind of phenomenon, where people just pick whatever's the most effective in terms of, like, a specific but broad... how do I put this? It's like a one specific thing, right? Like killing as many enemies as possible, or staying alive. But those things, even though it's a pretty specific in scope problem that's being solved, that problem being solved is important for a vast array of content. Revenant absolutely is overrated, in terms of Mesmer Skin is not that special if you know how to stay alive in other parts of the game. If you're using Bazarin, shield gating, even just stacking DR, Mesmer Skin's not really that important, and sort of to that end, it allows you to experience the interesting elements of other Warframe's kits. But at the same time, I'm not going to act like Mesmer Skin is bad. It turns off status effects and it turns off damage for at least as many seconds as you have charges. That's ridiculously good no matter how you slice it. Now, this is probably going to be a contentious take. I think Revenant deserves a rework, and I think he deserves a rework for two reasons. One, his entire kit's gimmick of playing around his thralls totally falls flat. And two, Mesmer Skin is just too fucking strong. So, for the first thing, Revenant's entire kit revolves around the idea that he enthralls enemies to serve as temporary allies, but then he has benefits for killing them in certain ways, like thralls take vastly more damage from Reeve, which allows his one-shot setup, or thralls drop overshield pickups if killed by your 4, which doesn't fucking matter because you have Mesmer Skin, but that's besides the point. They also erupt into plumes of fire on death, and if memory serves, I think those plumes of fire can convert more thralls. So the idea is that Revenant has this little group of enemies, this group of followers, where they're beneficial by virtue of them being allies that shoot at things and draw aggro and stuff, but then he can tactically kill them for different benefits, or he can, like, use Enthrall to set up an enemy for a Reeve if they're really tanky, he can make them drop overshield pickups for his allies, stuff like that. The problem, and I genuinely don't know why it's like this, is that Revenant can kill his own thralls with his normal weapons, and in a game like Warframe, where you're deleting entire rooms, it makes it so it is borderline impossible to not accidentally kill your own thralls constantly. And on top of that, Revenant's teammates can also kill his thralls, so it isn't even in his control if they are present a lot of the time. If you're in a team, like you load into a public lobby, and you're playing Revenant, and you want to use his kit and play around his thrall mechanic, and there is an Araxia in your lobby, get fucked. You're not doing anything. It's also sad too, because the thralls themselves just aren't very useful while alive either. I feel like if they got like a big damage boost, or there was some other benefit for having them alive, that would be cool, but as it stands, thralls are just individually really weak, and even when you have a group of them, they're just not super strong. The point of this is that I'm trying to say the thralls need to have a revision. I think that a lot of Revenant's kit would work much better if, for one, only his abilities could kill his thralls, to allow him to much more intentionally decide if a thrall lives or dies, but also making the thralls themselves feel more impactful while alive, so that the balance of killing them versus spawning new ones has more weight to it, right? The other problem, though, is Mesmer Skin. If you give a Warframe a no status effect invincibility button that puts enemies to sleep when they shoot you, go figure people aren't engaging with the rest of his kit because they don't need to anymore. Maybe this is going to be an opinion that people don't like, and I'm completely fine with that, but I think that from a design standpoint, Mesmer Skin should not exist in its current state. It solves one of the most fundamental problems of any video game where you fight things. It removes death from the equation while active, just wholesale. Nothing can threaten you unless it gets dispelled. And to that end, I think that they should just change Mesmer Skin from being total invincibility to like 90% DR or something like that. If they were to kind of scale it back to not be pure invincibility, so much of Revenant's kit would actually have meaning again. The heal from his Reeve would matter because he actually has to worry about his health. His overshield pickups from his 4 would matter because he actually has his shields taking damage. Even his shitty passive would matter, despite the fact that it should be replaced entirely because it still sucks. If Revenant didn't have invincibility on demand, you could keep the status immunity even, but the invincibility element of the equation makes Mesmer Skin so good at removing something that is so fundamentally important, which is not dying. And while I do think that every other frame in the game has their own approaches to not dying, I don't think it's hard to argue that Revenant is the best at not dying compared to almost every other frame because of Mesmer Skin. I mean, nowadays we have Persistence in Aros, and honestly, Arcane Persistence is like the new why aren't you just shield gating type of thing. I constantly get told on stream that I should just be using Persistence. That could be a separate take or rant in and of itself. Persistence isn't bad, but it is not the answer to everything. But when you look at Revenant, he has the best answer to a common fundamental problem players encounter, so of course people are going to pick him. So I think that if he was reworked to tone that back so he is not the best answer, but in exchange the rest of his kit is elevated so that there is more meat on the bones of his actual playstyle, that would put Revenant in a much more comfortable place and overall be a lot healthier for the game. So bringing it back to the actual take, I do agree that Revenant is overrated, but I cannot deny that Mesmer Skin is ridiculously strong. Yes, other frames can survive, but not as easily and often not as effectively as Revenant. And so I think that the fact that he is the answer to that problem should kind of be toned down, and the rest of his kit should be elevated to make him feel like a more complete Warframe. Okay, next up, this is going to be a fun one. I didn't think this was a hot take, but after seeing people's reactions, I guess it is. Heirloom Skins have always leaned into fan service. It didn't start with Embers. Frost just wasn't labeled a Gunner skin because it catered more to the girls and gays. Have you seen those abs? Okay, this is a can of worms I probably should not be opening, because people get really heated about this. But I think that saying that Frost and Mag are on the same level of Gunner skin as subsequent heirlooms is just kinda dishonest. Like, if you look at Mag, I don't think that she leans into fan service almost at all in her skin, and Frost has the abs, but that's kinda where it ends, I guess. You look at, like, Vauban is totally shirtless. Ember has the thing everyone knows her skin for, that being her giant ass. Valkyr is just Valkyr. Let's be real here. That they didn't need to do anything with her to make that one fan service. They could have completely like covered all of her body in like a robe, and she would probably still be gooned to regardless. And funnily enough, I'm pretty sure this comment was before the reveal of Mesa Heirloom, and I'm sorry, but come the fuck on, dude. Mesa Heirloom has gotta be... Dude, that skin is fucking insane. What do you mean? She's got, like, the fucking, like, leather fetish gear and assless chaps, dude. What the fuck were they doing when they made that skin? Dude, Liger just decided they were gonna go back to drawing Warframe porn. It's just in the fucking game now, I guess. I feel like when people talk about this, and the level of fan service in the Heirloom program. I guess I forgot to mention, Rhino also doesn't have a shirt on, but that's kind of whatever. When people talk about the level of fan service, like, I don't think it's honest to say that it's always been like that, because Frost and Mag were not on the same level as modern skins. And to be totally fair, Frost and Mag were designed by Minky, so there's a reason that they're not like that. I mean, same with Rhino. Rhino was also designed by Minky. He doesn't really lean super hard into the fan service thing either, despite, you know, like, being shirtless. But Ember and Valkyr were fan concepts. I don't actually know if Vauban was. Vauban might have been another Liger skin, but I do believe that the Mesa one was. So when you look at those other skins, I feel like they kind of have been leaning into it more and more over time, and then Mesa just goes whole hog, dude. People are... You know that video that Sabuchi posted where he was trying to build a system to play Warframe with his, like, erect dick? Dude, this video is gonna get demonetized for me talking about this. Maybe he was onto something. He could start selling that shit, because the amount of people who are going to be playing the game with one hand is going to absolutely fucking skyrocket at this point. The Mesa skin is, so... Dude, it's so out there. It's... Holy shit. I'm sorry. It's like... Look, okay, just to make something clear, I'm bisexual, so when it comes to Gooner skins of any gender, right, I feel like I'm not in a camp where I'm, like, outright repulsed from one direction or the other, if that makes sense. You know, I can appreciate gooning skins of any gender, thank you very much. It's called being sophisticated. It's very high-class stuff, okay? It's nobility-type shit, if you will. But there does come a point where it's just like, holy shit. Holy shit. I will say, though, I think this person does kind of make a decent point in terms of the Gooner skins aren't labeled as such when they cater towards gay dudes and women, or straight women, I should probably clarify. My friend Lucy is also bisexual, but she has a girlfriend. She's in, like, a lesbian relationship. And the Ember skin, I think that it changed her on a fundamental level. It changed her relationship with the game. I'm just going to put it that way. But I do think it's honestly kind of a valid wider community critique that, like, people don't throw a fit when a Gooner skin caters towards those, like, minority groups. But, like, at the same time, less people are gooning to them because they're a smaller slice of the player base. So I think it kind of makes sense that people don't kick up as much of a fuss about it because they're not personally, you know, in that camp of finding it attractive, so it doesn't really register as a problem to them. I don't know. Like I said, this is such a can of worms. I shouldn't have even fucking saved this take, because people are going to get so inflamed about it in the comments. To bring it back to the take itself, right, and to sort of leash myself a little bit, because I've been wandering around this entire video, even worse than normal. I don't think that it is fair to say that the OG heirlooms were on the same level of gooning as future heirlooms. Modern heirlooms, in terms of, you know, Ember, Valkyr, Vauban, and Mesa, don't know why it took me so long to think of her, are on another level from Minky's designs. There is some fan servicey stuff there, sure, even with, like, Frost and what have you, but I don't think that it's fair to say that the system has always been like that. More so that I think that Ember was the start, and they just kind of kept leaning into it. But I don't know, we'll see. Rebecca said on a dev short, I think it was, that there are talks about adding toggleable layers, so that Mesa's skin might have, like, an overcoat or something, for people who don't want to see that kind of thing. Personally, I feel like a lot of the outrage is whatever. Like, don't get me wrong, Mesa's skin is some Gooner shit. I feel like she's in borderline fetish gear, if you ask me. Like, that shit's nuts. But, in fairness, I don't think that having a skin that is, like, attractive is a terrible thing within reason, I guess. We're not the First Descendant over here, okay? The First Descendant's a Gooner game. I do not... Kazette, if you're watching this, I do not give a fuck what you say about the First Descendant. That shit is made so people will jerk their dick. And I do not care what you say. Anyways, we are not on that level yet, right? But I think that there is some fair concern about, like, crossing too far into that department. I don't know. It's a mess. I don't even know why I'm trying to ponder this. The long and short of it is, I don't feel like it's fair to say that the system has always catered to Gooners. I think that there is some reasonable concern about that in the future, but some people get way too puritanical over it. There's like a happy medium that has to be struck between, like, okay, we shouldn't drop a naked Warframe. Right. We shouldn't drop some Sabuchi fashion looking fucking skin. But at the same time, people who get outraged that, like, Vauban can take his shirt off are being kinda ridiculous. I think there's kind of like a medium that has to be struck there, personally. Okay, I have been talking. I did not realize it was this bad. I have been talking for an hour. I've been recording for an hour. I have made it through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 takes. Dude, I apparently have graduated with my PhD in fucking Japanese. I have no idea how I've even accomplished this. Like, I made the joke last time that we were only going to talk about, like, 5 takes in the next episode. Apparently, I wasn't fucking joking. We've actually gotten that bad. Okay, I want to try and get all of these out, so this is probably going to be, like, the longest episode of this series. I want to get through all of these, but I don't want to cut my thoughts short. I think I just need to rein myself in a little bit, because this is getting fucking ridiculous. Okay, with that said, next up, I want more cooperation to be involved in the game. I understand that many people like the game because everything is soloable, I am also in that camp, but there should be space for cooperation too. I am not necessarily talking about raids or dungeons, but more content like the 2-player Duviri puzzles, pre-rework Railjack, or maybe even 4-player Fisher missions. Especially the Duviri puzzles, those I found to be really fun. All of the mentioned pieces of content are soloable, but also present a certain advantage when co-op is in place, which I think is the best middle ground. Okay, I actually totally agree with this. I don't feel like there's a ton to talk about there beyond that, but I'll do my best. Yeah, honestly, I totally agree with this. I do firmly believe that Warframe should not have any content that cannot be done solo, because I feel like that's a huge linchpin for a lot of other games. Like, you look at Destiny 2, which has like 3 people playing it right now, so maybe you forgot it exists, but let's focus here. If you look at Destiny 2, my friend Phoenix was really into the game for many years. And a couple years back, this number may have changed, but this was the last data I heard, was that 70% of the player base had never completed a raid. Keep in mind, that is not doesn't raid regularly. That is never completed a raid, period. I imagine that if you take the player base that has done raids, but doesn't do them often, like they've just completed at least one, the amount of people that actually engage with that content on a regular basis is probably like 10% of the player base at that point. So I think it's a big pitfall for Destiny that there is so much content that you can't do by yourself. And yes, that rewards cooperation. Raids are a phenomenal experience when done with your friends. If you have enough people to play Destiny with, the raids are unlike anything else I've ever done in a game. They are so much fun. But if you don't have enough friends, you either have to LFG the raid, which is fucking torture. I would rather be waterboarded than LFG a raid, or you just don't get to do them, and I think that's a bad thing. Now, Destiny is a very different game than Warframe, despite all the surface level comparisons people make, that's the truth, but I do think that comparing it on those grounds sort of highlights why I personally think that having a system that requires a certain number of people to be played is a bad thing for games. And in Warframe, the ability to solo content is phenomenal. Even if it's easier with other people, it's great that you can solo stuff. Like, another great example this person didn't mention are Eidolon hunts. Eidolon hunts are vastly easier with more people, for the most part, if they know what they're doing, but if you are by yourself, you can still solo them, you just have to do multiple jobs at the same time. It was the same thing with pre-rework Railjack, and it's still kind of a thing with modern Railjack, but they lost a lot of the nuance of Railjack with Railjack Retrofit. That could be like a topic in and of itself. But when it comes to co-op play, I think that it is good to have a middle ground like things like Railjack, or this person highlights the Duviri puzzles. Those are great, especially because they're curated for co-op specifically. If you are not in co-op, you do not see them. If you are in co-op, you can encounter them. And it lets you have these fun moments of trying to, like, interact with your friends to find out how to solve the puzzle. And I think that that's a really great way to handle it, is to have, like, benefits to co-op that are contextual, where it's like, if you're solo, then this sort of extension of a pre-existing thing, like the Enigma puzzles, doesn't really show up for you. But if you're in a group, now there are these special extensions of that system that are available to you that put a new spin on it. I'm not really engaging with the take a ton here besides saying I agree and then outlining why I agree in terms of like why I think solo play should still be possible for basically everything, but also that I do think it's a good thing that when people are playing together, they should have the game sort of cater some stuff towards that experience. Now, Warframe's in a weird spot in general because it is a co-op game and they've always advertised themselves as a co-op game, but teammates have become like less and less useful over time because of like Warframe kits becoming more self-sustaining and our power level just generally going up. It's a weird thing, but Warframe's other co-op woes are beyond the scope of this take, and I've been yapping enough. I need to try and control myself. So I'm just gonna say, I agree, having more content curated specifically within the context of co-op that isn't like requiring co-op to be done, period, is a cool thing that they should do more of. And having more teamwork-focused modes like Railjack, where you can do it by yourself, but you're going to be juggling a lot of jobs. Same with Eidolon hunts. You'll be juggling a lot of jobs that other people could be doing, and that would be really beneficial. I think that structuring more stuff around that idea would be a great approach moving forward. Okay, next up. Hi, it's me, Blueprint27. My hot take is that many of the people talking about bad frames are not qualified to talk about them and any needed reworks. They just write on the words of other people's opinions and twist the reality of things. It's easier to copy other people like a parrot than actually do your own research and experience things for yourself. 90% of my hours in Warframe are spent in the simulacrum, and I have studied every frame deeply, pre- and post-reworks, and I can confidently say that frames with extremely flawed designs like Banshee and Equinox are actually not that bad in terms of power. I am not saying that they are undeserving of a rework. I would love to see them reworked. It's just that people shun them way too hard for no good reason, and it really annoys me. Following the same vein, Revenant suffers the same problem as pre-rework Valkyr did. His gameplay design contradicts itself, and he appeals to people only because he gets access to a gray health bar. Okay, the first thing I want to say is no shade to you, Blueprint. The way you mentioned the I've studied every frame deeply hits me with the like, I was studying the Blade type shit. It's like Blueprint's like, you know, well, you were out getting a job. Well, you were out getting a job, progressing your career, staying in school. I was in the simulacrum. I was locked the fuck in. I was learning the intricacies of frames that people think are dog shit. Again, I'm not trying to be a dick, I just think that the way that was worded unintentionally, like, conjured that up in my mind. Okay, regardless, there's, like, several layers to this that I kind of want to deconstruct, and the first one is the first thing that Blueprint says, in terms of many people talking about bad frames are not qualified to talk about them, they just write on other people's opinions. The first thing I want to say is, what clears the qualification standard for this? Because if you want to say that the qualification standard is that you're a player of the game, that's probably too broad. If the qualification standard is that you have actual design knowledge, that's probably too narrow. Most of us aren't game designers, let alone ones for Warframe. Is the sort of qualification bar that you play the frame enough? Well, what's the specific requirement for that? I've known several people who have 70% of their playtime on a frame, and they still don't play them in a way that's effective. I know it's weird, but some people genuinely are like that. So I feel like to try and move forward with the sort of qualification baseline here, just to kind of work off the rest of the take, I'm going to assume what Blueprint means is people that have not actually experienced the critiques that they're parroting. I'm assuming that's what they mean, that they haven't played the frame or experimented with them or anything like that to an extent that they understand why certain critiques come from a certain place, or even really whether or not those critiques are valid in the first place. Blueprint says that people parrot other people's opinions and that it's easier to do that than do your own research. That's completely true, and it goes for honestly any video game community. Reddit mentality, as I call it, because of the upvote and downvote system on Reddit literally promoting the creation of these types of environments, where people fall into like a groupthink sort of mentality, is so bad in just modern game communities in general. And in Warframe, a lot of people will fall in line with that kind of thing because it's just easier. I do completely agree with that. I feel like, again, I don't really where the qualification standard is cleared, but I do agree that a lot of people approach things in that manner. It also is like this weird thing. On the modern internet in general, it's kind of assumed that you have to have an opinion about every topic, and I don't understand why. Like, I have people come into my streams pretty often, actually, and say, like, CoolKid, what would you do to rework Limbo or Chroma? And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't play them enough to say anything on that. Like, yeah, I know how they work, but I don't really like playing them, so I don't play them super often. Like, if you asked me prior to Oberon's rework what I would have done, I could have given you some answers because I actually played Oberon. But when it comes to frames that, like, I don't really play that often, I don't want to give an opinion on them if I don't think I know enough to have one that's worth saying. But a lot of people don't really care to clear that and just kind of say what other people that they assume know more about the subject are saying. And like I said, it feels like everyone kind of has to have an opinion on everything. So if they're asked something like that, they just fall into the community line of thinking because they haven't bothered to research the subject themselves, but they still have to have an opinion on it. I don't know. I think more people should be willing to just admit when they don't know enough about a topic to provide a worthwhile opinion, and they should just leave it at that. That's what I try to do, at least. Okay, now for the second paragraph, saying that plenty of Warframes that are flawed in terms of design are not that bad in terms of power. I do totally agree with that, and there's a lot of people that conflate poor design with bad effectiveness. Like, you look, for example, at Equinox, like Blueprint mentions in their take. Equinox is a frame who is not bad. She has a lot of power behind her. Her nuke is still incredibly strong even today. If you take her with like a slam weapon or something to build up a lot of charge with a lot of damage, she can clear rooms really often and in a huge radius. The thing that I think makes Equinox undeserving of a rework is not that she's weak or that she's bad, it's that she fundamentally fails to deliver on the idea of her kit, being that she has two forms that she switches between, where one's offensive and one's defensive. Equinox's gameplay loop generally rewards only staying in one form, and I think that's kind of her fundamental problem. You don't ever really want to switch between Night and Day Equinox. Typically, you're gonna build for one form and never switch to the other one, so she just fundamentally fails to deliver on her concept. That doesn't mean Equinox is bad in the sense that she is weak or that she can't accomplish anything. That's not true at all. The thing that I think makes Equinox bad is that she doesn't really deliver on the fantasy her kit is designed for, and that's why I think she should be reworked. And I think a lot of people kind of conflate the two, where if a frame deserves a rework because their design is flawed, like Equinox, people kind of extrapolate that to mean that they are also bad in terms of power, which is not necessarily true. Now, Banshee's mentioned here by name as well. To be honest, I don't think Banshee needs like a super full-blown rework. I mean, maybe she does, but I don't feel like her kit is fundamentally super flawed. I just don't understand why all of her actions are two-handed or like full body. I feel like if they made most of her actions one-handed, like mainly Sonar and Sonic Boom, but I don't know why the fuck Silence is full body either. That's besides the point. If they made more of her kit one-handed, that would smooth over most of my problems with her. I do think that Soundquake needs to be fully reworked at this point, or maybe even totally replaced, but otherwise, like, I think a lot of her kit just needs to have some like rough patches smoothed over. Like, Sonar weak spots should not highlight parts of the body that don't take extra damage. They should just highlight only the body part, not the weird like splotch the thing that they have going on. There's a lot I could say about that. Banshee is actually a frame that I did play quite a bit of, because she was my main Lich Hunter for quite a while, so I have more thoughts about her than some others. But I don't think that she's like fundamentally poorly designed in the same way that like Equinox is, in terms of like she fails to deliver on her idea. I think that she just has like a lot of weird frictions in her kit that don't need to exist. Blueprint even says himself that he's fine with these frames getting reworked and would like to see them reworked. It's just that people conflate the, like, design flaws with being bad on, like, a power level, and that's totally fair. The last thing Blue mentions is the Revenant suffering from the same problem as pre-rework Valkyr, where his gameplay design contradicts itself and he appeals to people only because he gets access to a gray health bar. I already talked for quite a bit about Revenant earlier, you can kind of just defer to my opinion there, but I do agree with this stance. I think that Revenant does have the same flaw, where his invincibility overshadows the rest of his kit, and his kit also has design flaws, like I mentioned with his Thrall gimmick not really working. So, like I said, you can just defer to my opinion earlier in the video if you want more of my thoughts on that. Overall, with this take, to kind of sum up my thoughts, I do generally agree. I think that a lot of people don't really do their own research and just kind of parrot the opinions of others, and that goes not just for what frame needs a rework, but so many other things and so many other communities, and just other topics in this one as well. I think that a lot of people do conflate that poorly designed or having like design frictions in their kit means that they are bad on a power level or unusable, which is not necessarily true. Like, look at Limbo. He's awkward for a lot of people to play, but he is not bad if you know how he works. And Revenant I've already talked about, so that's just kind of to wrap up my thoughts on this one. Okay, next up, Warframe needs to remake as many game modes as they can to make damage irrelevant, and instead make a mission that does allow you to just plop Vauban Vortex and AFK for 30 seconds if you want to, or make missions where you have to cover great distance by foot and not get killed for Titanias and Gausses. Okay, so I have a few videos called DE Doesn't Understand Overguard and DE Still Doesn't Understand Overguard, where I express the opinion that game modes should not be so focused on killing. I think that is a fair take. Damage is by far the most popular option in this game because the most content encourages it, and I think that having alternate playstyles where you can use crowd control or some other method to engage with an objective is a good thing. However, this person says remake game modes to make damage irrelevant. Damage should not be irrelevant in the majority of the game, because damage is one of the main ways that power progression functions. Increasing your damage is one of the main mechanisms by which you get more powerful. If you aren't feeling any increase because the damage wasn't ever necessary, then I don't really feel like there's going to be a great reward mechanism for people to progress through the game. And on top of that, killing shit is fun. It's a shooter game. People want to kill things, right? Like, that's part of the fun of playing the game. I do think that, like, nuking entire rooms loses its luster after, you know, you've played the game for as long as I have, but overall, killing things should still be relevant. I just think that it shouldn't be the only way to accomplish certain objectives, or kind of like conversely, that things like crowd control are punished, like in modes like Defense, where they actually make things take longer. This person also mentions things like just letting you plop down a Vauban Vortex and AFK for 30 seconds. No, do not do this again. And people might be like, what do you mean again? When I first started playing this game, crowd control was the meta, and if you would go into a survival mission, what people would do is they would find a corner and they would throw down a vortex and they would just hold down the left trigger and they would get up and do something else, or sorry, the right trigger, but they would just get up and do something else. It was so unbelievably boring, and I think that the solution to this isn't just to add game modes that are as, like, brain off as something like Survival before the addition of the bypass, I guess, but something that is, like, as brain off as, like, OG Survival or as Exterminator something for other playstyles. I do not think that is the solution. What I think we need are more sophisticated objectives that are more interesting for players to engage with in more ways than just killing stuff. Like, if you look at Ascension is a great example of this in my opinion. Ascension is a mode that has so many cool ways you can play it. Yes, you can just shoot everything, and that's totally fine if you want to do that, but crowd control is very good in all of the phases of the fight, and mobility is super good for scouring for batteries in the elevator phase of the mission. The objectives are complicated enough that there is a lot of interesting ways to approach them. You can just go for damage, and it's totally fine if you want to play them that way. I'm not faulting anybody for that, but there's more there that allows you to engage with the objectives in interesting and different ways, versus a mode like Defense, where kills per minute is basically just the objective. Sure, you have to defend the thing that's getting shot, but to some extent, if you can just kill everything, that doesn't even really matter. So, I think that the solution to this isn't to make missions designed for specific warframes to be, like, the best. Like, this person mentioned as well, like, you have to cover great distances by foot for Titanias and Gausses. First of all, that game mode exists, and it's called Capture. But also, I feel like designing modes with, like, oh yeah, this will be good for, like, 4 warframes, I just don't think is the way to approach things. I think that the solution, in my mind, is to make objectives that are more open-ended, as opposed to having something that is more rigid, in terms of, like, you know, oh, just survive for 5 minutes or something like that. Have more ways to engage with the objectives. In fact, Survival did a great job with this with the rework that it was given with the bypasses. I originally didn't really care about this that much, but Sci-Fi Freak, who I assume many of you probably know about, he got into a call with me because he's working on a video about Survival and kind of discussed his findings, and we did some experimenting and whatnot as well. And the Survival changes were legitimately brilliant. And the reason that they were brilliant is because they opened up an entirely new way to engage with the mode. They took the fundamentals of Survival and kind of turned it on its head to reward exploration over killing and to reward mobility over killing, and that was such a great way to approach it. So, for those who don't know, in a nutshell, here's how the security bypasses work. When a life support tower spawns, a bypass will spawn within a 125 meter radius of the tower. If you find that bypass, a terminal will be marked, you carry it to the terminal and upload it, and for the next minute, you make double progress. So essentially, you make 2 minutes of in-game time for 1 minute of real-life time. Because of the way that the spawning mechanics are with survival towers and stuff, optimally, implying you are picking these up as fast as possible, which isn't really realistic, but optimally, you are getting about 150 seconds of in-game time for 90 seconds of real-life time. Now, if you don't want to engage with this system, if you just want to kill stuff, that is totally fine. You can still play the game mode that way. But if you do want to engage with the system, it opens up such an interesting new dimension to things, because now your objective is not to kill shit, it is to find the bypass, and it changes that approach for 2 reasons. 1, because you are getting through reward rotations faster, life support doesn't matter as much, because you don't need to worry about suffocating, right? Because the life support is no longer pegged to the in-game timer as much as it previously was. So you are making it through reward rotations faster, so you need less life support per rotation, if that makes sense. The second reason is, generally speaking, it's a good idea to consume life support towers after you find their corresponding bypass. The reason for this was something explained to me by Sci-Fi. Whenever the game is spawning a bypass, it essentially goes in order from tower to tower, in terms of like spawn order. And if you leave a tower and the game sees that a tower is already present, it will not spawn a bypass, even if its bypass has been consumed already, from Sci-Fi's own testing at least. So it encourages you to consume life support towers to free up that space for future bypasses. Because you're using the towers more, you have more life support in the system, and you need less life support overall to make it to reward rotations. So it puts this new spin on the mode, where instead of focusing on killing, you need to focus on finding these bypasses as quickly as you possibly can to maximize your efficiency. And that opens up a whole new dimension to the mode, because now instead of optimizing your kills per minute, maybe you're optimizing, like, how quickly you can navigate tile sets. Maybe you're taking Golden Instinct to find things faster, or Loot Radar, or like Animal Instinct or Thief's Wit. Maybe you're using crowd control so that enemies don't kill you while you're looking for the bypass. There are so many new elements that become relevant when you're focusing on the bypasses over killing, and the way they opened up the objective with that was such a just phenomenally good idea. When I first heard about the bypass, I really didn't think it was anything, but after my talk with Sci-Fi, he was totally onto something with his pitch about Survival being a great game mode. It is so much more fun when you actually try to hunt for the bypasses, and I highly recommend it if you haven't played it that way. So, to sum up my thoughts on this, I do not think that we should design game modes around specific warframes or specific playstyles, and then make other playstyles less useful or less relevant, or in this person's own words, irrelevant, in order to do that. I think that instead we should have objectives that are more open-ended, that can be engaged with in more ways, and as such, more emergent strategies kind of evolve because there's new approaches that you can take to those mission types. Like I said, Survival did a great job with that with its rework. I think that Ascension does a great job with that. Honestly, Bounties do a great job with that because Bounties have a variety of different scenarios you can encounter that make different things useful, and the list just kind of goes on. Now, most modes do reward damage over all else, like Legosite Harvest is, super damage focused, Alchemy rewards damage for Amphor drops, even Mirror Defense rewards damage for glyph spawning, but you can still use other strategies in those modes. And I think that we don't have to bend over backwards to make damage irrelevant, but we should open up the floor for playstyles that do not revolve around killing things. I don't think the solution is to make modes that are specifically for certain archetypes of frames and just disregard the others, but I think that it's good to design open-ended mission types that reward all different styles of play because they're more open-ended and allow for more organic evolution of their respective metas. Okay, next up. IMO, a lot of frames have an identity, but no purpose to be used most of the time. I have never seen a Varuna in a public lobby, ever since Lua's Prey released. I like a lot of those frames' ideas and designs, but there isn't much purpose to use them over other frames. DA and TA help with this, but you 100% need to have a competent build on them or you're getting smoked. Okay, this is interesting to me because I feel like I have to ask, what exactly do you mean when you say no purpose to be used? There is a limited number of roles that a Warframe can occupy, right? Like, even within the game's current role system, you've got crowd control, tanking, damage, support, stealth. Those are kind of like the big five that the game has listed, right? Different Warframes approach those roles in different ways, but they still occupy the same role because that's kind of how games with multiple characters work. So if the criticism is that they're not releasing frames that are in roles that are uncontested by other frames, how would they even do that? And beyond that, I feel like the main reason that you would play a Warframe is because you think they're fun, or you like the way they're designed, or you think that their kit is, cool and you enjoy the way that it works. There are plenty of reasons to play a Warframe beyond other Warframes also serve this job, right? It's not just about the job the Warframe does. It is about how they do that job. I think my friend Idan put it well when I was doing a stream once, where he said, nuking isn't necessarily fun for a lot of veteran players. When new frames come out, it's how they nuke that makes things fun. Like, you look at, for example, the frames from last year. We got Temple, Araxia, Noko, and Uriel. Now, Temple doesn't really nuke, but that's besides the point. If you look at Araxia, Noko, and Uriel, they all do nuke rooms. You could argue that they're all in that sort of damage dealer role, but they do it in different ways. Araxia relies on buffing her weapons to clear rooms. Noko requires a lot of setup in terms of positioning his mushrooms carefully, which is honestly a really cool way to approach it. And Uriel has a meter he has to fill in order to clear out rooms with Brimstone. All of these frames clear out rooms. They all occupy that job, but they do the job in different ways. And they have other tools that complement them, right? Noko has crowd control and some support benefits with Bright Bonnet and Stinkbrain, and Araxia has crowd control with her 2. She has minions with her 3 that can do stuff and also serve as crowd control. Her 1 generates orbs, which has got some supportive elements to it. Uriel has mobility on his 1, he has healing on his 2, he has damage vulnerability on his 3. They all have elements to them that are beyond just that specific job, and I think it's important to keep in mind that a Warframe is not just their role. They are a combination of all of the elements of their kit, and normally that means they have their feet in multiple roles. This person mentions specifically Varuna. This was before Varuna Prime, so I'm actually glad I waited on this one because I've been playing Varuna a lot more, and yes, Varuna is able to just nuke rooms like a lot of other frames, but the way she does it is where you find the fun. Just because the frames serve the same role doesn't necessarily mean that you never would want to play another frame. Do you need Varuna because there's a specific job that only she can do? Not necessarily, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's honestly a good thing that within a given role that has a broad set of applications or uses, you have individual Warframes that accomplish the goals of that role in different ways. Like you look at Frost, Gara, and Limbo, they're all frames that are great for defending objectives, but they do it in different ways. Frost throws up a bubble around the objective, and he has a lot of crowd control that can slow or freeze enemies. Gara puts up a wall that is able to vitrify enemies inside of it. She can detonate it for area damage. She has her 2, which can give objectives DR and healing if she's using Mending Splinters. She has her 1 for a lot of damage for like enemies that are in front of her and things like that. And Limbo is more about enemy manipulation. He has Cataclysm that he can use, he has Stasis to freeze enemies, freeze their projectiles. He can use Rift Torrent to clear them out more efficiently if he's, getting a damage buff from that. He can banish individual enemies even without Cataclysm. They all can serve the same job of defending an objective, like, efficiently, but the way they do it varies, and that's where the fun is found. So, just to kind of respond to this take, I guess, in a more concise manner, you don't need new frames, but I think that saying that they have no purpose kind of misses the point of having a game with multiple Warframes or characters in general. Yes, you can have one frame of each major job, and you'll probably be fine in any application that requires that job, but the fun doesn't come from having a frame that is good at, like, a role nobody else can touch. It's about the way that they approach accomplishing their job that makes them interesting, in my opinion. I think that that's the approach that Warframe has generally taken, is how do you make this pre-existing archetype of, like, support, crowd control, damage, what have you, more interesting. Like, you look at Foley, right? Foley is a crowd control frame and a support frame in a lot of ways. She has her damage elements, but that's where a lot of her kit lies, is in crowd control and support. And she has an armor strip, which other frames have. She has damage reduction for her team that other frames have. She has slowing and orb generation, which other frames have. But she still approaches those things in a unique way that makes the experience of accomplishing her role feel unique. So yeah, I don't think it's fair to categorize that frames have no purpose, because if you have a frame that already does another job, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that frames that also do the same job are not worth considering at all. They can still accomplish a lot. You just kind of have to find out how you're supposed to accomplish that job. Fuck my life, dude. I have 4 takes left, and I've been recording this for 1 hour and 40 minutes. It won't be that long in the video, because I have to cut out bad takes and stuff, but oh, this was a mistake. Okay, next up, my hot take. I don't think the grind in Warframe is actually that bad nowadays, especially compared to other games out there. 2013 to 16 Warframe's grind was indeed brutal, but DE has made some crazy improvements, especially in the new player experience. I completely agree, 100%. People act like this game is absurdly grindy even still, because, to be blunt, people love to parrot talking points from 10 years ago. Blueprint was onto something with that, I think. People love to parrot talking points from 10 years ago. It's the same with the no endgame thing. Warframe has endgame now. It's called Deep and Temporal Archimedia. Or really, I think you could extrapolate that to anything with Archon modifiers if you wanted. Even if you don't really like the endgame, it's undeniable there is an endgame activity or two in the game now, even if there's not a ton. The grind in Warframe back in the day was absolutely brutal. Like, Condition Overload only dropped at like a, what is it? It's a super low chance, lower than 1 in 1,000, I think, from specifically Drekker Butchers. That mod was worth crazy money if you got your hands on it, because it was so rare and so good. Now, don't get me wrong, there are still grinds that suck these days. Citrine's is pretty miserable, for example, but I think that they've made so many great improvements to how grindy the game is, and most of the grinds feel pretty fair. Especially like this person mentions other games. Dude, I don't see people complain about the grind in Destiny 2. That game's way fucking grindier than Warframe if you care about optimizing literally at all. Grinding for like the optimal armor roll for all of your exotics, or the optimal perk roll for all of your guns, is fucking soul draining. Like, I had mentioned, I think this was in the last Hot Takes thing when I talked about the Rivens, but my attempt to get Scintillation, where I rolled like over 40 of them and didn't get the one I wanted, and then Nitro opened a few and got the one I wanted on his second try, that shit sucks. And grinds like that, where you're just slamming your head into the wall, are so unbelievably unfun. And I think DE did a phenomenal job at improving that when they added pity systems. The fact that, I think it was from Orphic's Venom onward, that you can buy the parts is fantastic. From a design perspective, it was such a good decision. And the reason I think that is because it totally reframes the, mental experience of grinding for something. For a grind with no pity system, every time you do not get the thing you want, you are unlucky, because you are making no progress towards that thing that's guaranteed. You have now not gotten the item, so functionally that time feels wasted. But with a pity system, you are always making small but somewhat consistent progress towards what you need. So now, if you get the thing you want to drop naturally, you feel lucky as opposed to unlucky because you got the thing and that reduced the amount of grind that you needed to do where you had previously mentally mapped it out based on the pity currency. So the pity system kind of reframes the mental game from feeling like your time was totally wasted when you don't get what you want, to knowing that you're making consistent progress towards your goal, and even if you're unlucky, you'll get there anyways. And that was just a fantastic decision. Basically every frame we've gotten for a while now has followed that approach. Honestly, I'd love to see it retroactively added to some of the open world frames and stuff as well. But I think that was a really good idea from DE, and I'm glad it's become so prevalent. So yeah, I totally agree with this. Modern Warframe, it has its grinds that kind of suck, I will very much agree with that much. But for the most part, people act like this game is still in the 2013 to 2016 era when it absolutely isn't. Warframe's grind, I would say, overall, is pretty fair. Okay, next up. The Helminth system is horrible. All it does is make good frames even better and give bad frames a band-aid. I see a point where people want to make creative synergies in builds, but that's 1% of it all. The rest is just slapping Gloom, Nourish, and Roar on everything. In my eyes, it ruins original kits and is there as a substitute for players to fix bad frames because DE doesn't feel like doing so. Okay, I have said my piece about the Helminth in this video already. It took 25 fucking minutes, but I do not like the way this is framed. The Helminth system, for its flaws, opened up a new dimension to build diversity and creativity that was completely unseen before. There is so much cool stuff you can do that only works because the system is in place, even if people will be lazy and just take the best options on things like Roar and Nourish. This person, to me, is totally throwing the baby out with the bathwater on this one, in terms of well, there are people that only use the meta picks, so the system shouldn't exist at all. I don't agree with that, and also the idea that DE uses the Helminth system as a band-aid for bad frames so that they don't have to fix them is just, patently untrue, and provably untrue. Look at the amount of Warframe reworks we've gotten since new DE has taken charge, right, with Pablo at the helm of the design stuff. Let me just kind of run through them mentally. So, Lewis Prey gave us Grendel and Ureli, and then after that was 2023, so I don't think we got any into Citrine's Last Wish or Duviri. Abyss of Daggeth gave us Hydroid's rework, Dante Unbound gave us Inaros' rework, then Jade Shadows gave us reworks for Ember and Frost. Ember's was not fantastic, to be honest, but that's besides the point. After that was Kome and the Five Fates, that gave us Caliban's rework. 1999 came out, and that gave us Nyx and Trinity's reworks. Techrod Encore gave us a rework for Ashe. Io Weaver gave us a rework for Valkyr. And then, I believe the most recent rework at the current moment was Noko's update, Valis Undermined, which gave us Oberon's rework. So, we have gotten, there are probably even some I'm forgetting, but we have gotten so many reworks in the time since modern DE has taken over. And we were still getting reworks back then after the Helminth 2, but especially nowadays, I just do not agree with this argument at all, that DE just doesn't want to fix bad frames. Oberon was generally considered by a lot of people to be the worst frame in the game, and he still got a rework. I think that DE has very obviously been making an effort to improve weaker warframes. We are in a bit of a lull with that right now. We haven't really gotten that many reworks since Oberon, right? It was the last one, so it's been 6 months. This is coming out right before the April 24th dev stream, so maybe I'm gonna eat my words for this, but I'm fairly confident we'll get a Warframe rework revealed, because we haven't had one in quite a while. But DE very obviously does not use the Helminth as a substitute to ignore Warframes that have problems. I think you could make the argument that certain individual abilities that should be buffed are being band-aided over with the Helminth, but like whole warframes, absolutely, I do not agree. I feel like this take plays a lot into what I said earlier with my, like I said, 25-minute rant about the Helminth or whatever, but the way this is framed in terms of like the Helminth system is terrible because people just use meta shit and it makes it so that DE doesn't have to rework stuff. I just think that framing is just not the truth, just plain and simple. Also, this is one of those things where, again, if you feel like it's a problem that you're ruining your kit or what have you, or that the meta picks are too dominant, you don't have to pick them. Again, I am not saying that you cannot criticize a system that you choose to not engage with because you think it's bad. That's totally fine. But if other people are making builds in a way that they like, that's not necessarily a problem for you, is it? Like, sure, Gloom, Nourish, and Roar and things like that are the answer in a ton of situations, and there's an argument to be made there that they should be toned down so that that's not the case. I think that's fair. But if other people aren't playing the game in the way you want them to, with like creative synergies and builds, I don't really feel like that means that the entire system should be thrown out because not enough people are using it in the way you think it should be used for. So again, I'm not trying to be mean to this person when I say this, I just feel like their comment is framed in a way that's like scathing and also kind of looking down on the way people use the tools given to them and the developers for giving us those tools in the first place. So, without deferring to my previous Helminth opinion too much, I do not agree with most of what is proposed here. We have been getting so many Warframe reworks since new DE took over, with like, you know, Pablo and Rebecca and all them, so it's not here to band-aid over bad Warframe kits. People just playing into the meta, there is an argument to be made for those abilities being too good and for that being a problem, but it is something you can personally avoid if you want to use the system for more creative purposes. And just because people play to the meta doesn't mean that the whole system should be totally thrown out. Okay, next up is a topic I feel pretty strongly about. The Tauron strike grind is not that bad. Farming your first artifact is going to take 3 to 4 hours at most because you get half of the resources for free at the end of the old piece. And you only need one artifact because you can only use one focus school at a time. In general, the game doesn't incentivize you to grind for multiple schools, outside of waybound nodes. If you are at the point of grinding for multiple schools, the extra grind for the artifact isn't that much. I don't agree with this at all. I'm just gonna be, like, blunt. I don't understand why people defend the Tauron strike grind with arguments like this, but I'm going to kind of break this down. So, I outline a lot of my issues with the Tauron strike grind in my Tauron Strikes Need Help video, but to kind of make a more succinct version of the argument here, 3 to 4 hours for your first artifact, when you have half the resources already, is still a lot of time. And also, like yes, most players will unlock the artifact for their first focus school first, because the grind through all the focus schools is pretty long. But if you're going to be unlocking other schools and using other strikes, then you're still adding like 5 to 6 more hours per school in terms of grinding after this point, or by this person's own numbers, it would be like 6 to 8 hours per school, because of the 3 to 4, and then, you know, that being half the amount of time. Now, the thing that irks me about these arguments is, for one, 6 to 8 hours per focus school when you're not necessarily, like, grinding through the focus school itself at the same time, right? In terms of, like, the focus and stuff you need, is a lot of extra grind. Like, just a full stop. 6 to 8 hours for a focus school without also getting, you know, focus on a large scale outside of just whatever lenses or whatever you have equipped is a long fucking time. Not even counting the amount of time that it takes to level them up, because that's something that this is also conveniently ignoring, is it takes a shit ton of focus to max your strike, and more materials beyond what you need to actually get it in the first place. But also, people like to say that you don't need to get more than one because you only use one focus school, and that is such a narrow-minded way of playing the game and engaging with the focus system. I use all 5 focus schools because it depends on who I'm playing, because different focus schools give you different solutions to different problems, and they allow you to build your frame around those solutions, you know, being deferred to your focus school. And I think that most people will have one specific school they gravitate towards. I am a Xenuric truther till the day I die, but some people I know really like to rely on Naramon for the combo count, or Vazarin for the healing and the invincibility, or Matarai because of the power strength and the cast speed, or Unairu for the defense strip and what have you. There are people that will gravitate towards one school, and I think that is totally fine, and people will generally grind the artifact for the school they use the most for that reason, and again, that is totally fine. But people like to say that it is okay for the game to make you grind for 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours, just to get the artifact, not even to level it up. This grind is not in parallel necessarily to the regular focus grind, because outside of whatever lenses and stuff you have, it's not going to give you like a particularly high amount of focus, so you still have to grind all the focus to max the fucking thing. And even after all that, you have to do it for 4 focus schools, right? The full grind is for 4 focus schools. You have to grind it for 5 of them, but the first one is somewhat reduced. And people will say, well, the grind's not that bad because I don't use the other focus schools. So your argument is the grind isn't that bad because you are choosing to not engage with the grind. Like, am I hearing this correctly? The argument that the grind isn't that bad is that you don't want to engage with the grind because you only use one focus school? I feel like we shouldn't have a grind in the game that actively dissuades you from using other focus schools because the cost to entry is so steep. Different focus schools grant different benefits and are good on different warframes and are good for different setups. I think that you should progress through the different focus schools if you can, because there's a lot of interesting stuff that they all are able to provide you. Having a grind that is this egregious, that could take you, in theory, 30 to 40 hours to finish, not even counting the focus that you have to grind for it. I just don't agree with that, right? To just be like, well, that's not a big deal because most people just use one focus school. So like the argument is the grind isn't bad because most people won't engage with it. Maybe people aren't engaging with the grind because it's bad. Maybe people aren't moving into other focus schools and broadening their horizons because it's too expensive. You could make this argument, frankly, about the other focus schools at a base level, too. The amount of focus it takes to even get a focus school up and running and feeling usable is kind of exorbitant, and if you're not able to grind out Eidolons to surpass your daily focus limit with Eidolon shards and stuff, it just takes fucking forever. So, no, I just don't agree with this. The grind for your first strike isn't terrible, but the idea that it's okay for the grind to be absurdly long because most people aren't going to use more than one focus school, I just don't agree with at all. Again, the grind won't be bad if you choose not to engage with it, sure, but I feel like that's just kind of skirting around the problem. And again, they say in this, like, if you're at the point of grinding for multiple schools, the extra grind for the artifact isn't that much. Again, the grind for the artifact is not necessarily in parallel to the grind for focus. Typically, if you're grinding for focus, you're doing that shit in ESO because it's the way, like, the most efficient way to do it for most purposes for your daily limit, and you're doing it in Eidolons. Grinding for the artifact is an independent process, especially if you already have your other schools maxed before you got to the old piece, like many of us veterans did when we grinded them out. I already had all my focus schools done. Again, I'm trying not to be like mean to this person or to people in general, but I don't know why people defend the Tauron strike grind so much. I agree that if you have like this powerful central mechanic of a focus school, it should be locked behind some amount of grind, but 6 to 8 hours just to unlock the fucking thing, let alone the focus and materials required to max it out for like an item. The strikes are honestly just kind of still mid. Thara and Nidri are good. Kogron and Lorak are fine. Vexoric I'm not a huge fan of. But the bonuses that they provide you are just not worth the insane investment that they require. And I don't know why people are so fervent that it doesn't need any change or isn't that bad, when they self-admit like this, like, oh yeah, well, I only use one, or most people will only use one, so the grind isn't that bad because why engage with the others? So again, I disagree with this. I think it's kind of a backwards way to approach it, and I don't understand why people are so fervent about this particular grind not being that bad because they choose to not engage with it. Okay. My recording has just crossed the 2-hour mark. I don't think I've ever sat down and recorded a video for this long in one sitting, so this has been kinda rough. But we are finally at the last take I had saved from the last batch. So, finally, for the last take of this video, They could completely revert the AoE weapon ammo nerfs, and not much would change. We have power creeped so far past them now with Incarnins and several frame abilities. To be perfectly honest, I agree with this for the most part. I think that the main goal, honestly, of nerfing their ammo economy was to nerf their use with Wukong, especially, because they made Wukong Celestial Twin pull from your ammo pool. I feel like those two nerfs were kind of like a hand-in-hand kind of thing, where they made, like, in isolation, each nerf wasn't as, like, effective, I guess, but when viewed together, there was obviously, like, a particular goal they were trying to achieve. But truth be told, I think that for the most part, that's true. Removed from the special case of Wukong, Incarnins and a lot of abilities that nuke shit, like Araxia's 4, for example, with the explosions it causes, they're just so strong that the AoE weapon nerfs just don't really matter that much anymore. Honestly, if anything, it's made a lot of weapons just super uncomfortable to use. Like, if you want my opinion, Zar and Brahma got over-nerfed in that update for sure. For the time, I understand why they did it, but like, have you tried using Brahma nowadays? Even if you use like ammo case or something like that, it's just so uncomfortable to use. You have so little ammo that, like, it's really fun to shoot this, like, explosive cluster bomb arrow into a group of enemies. That shit is awesome, but you can only do it for, you know, what is it, 5 shots, I think? And even if you build around storing more and whatnot, picking up 1 arrow from each ammo pickup is just so uncomfortable to play with. So, I would say, for the most part, yeah, I actually do agree with this. If they reverted, hell, most of the AoE nerfs that they did, because it wasn't just ammo economy, there was other parts of that too, but they could revert most of that shit, and I don't even think it would change much. I do think that, like I said, a lot of it was more specifically targeting Wukong and his clone's ability to autonomously play the game for him by using AoE weapons, and I think that was a big part of why, like I said, the nerfs were like a very hand-in-hand kind of thing, but when it comes to, like, the wider Warframe experience, Incarnins have effectively infinite ammo and are almost all AoE weapons, like at least half of them are, in terms of, you know, like, your Struns and your Burstons and your Brattons and your Latrons, and the list just kind of goes on, right? Gorgon is an AoE, stuff like that. So, yeah, maybe not half. Now that I think about it, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but with those having infinite ammo and being as strong as they are, and like this person says, several frame abilities like Noko's Spore Spring, Araxia's Silken Stride, even Uriel's Brimstone, though that does require a meter to charge, so it's not like a one-to-one comparison, obviously, but when you look at stuff like that, it's like, yeah, I do think that we're at the point where if they reverted the AoE ammo economy nerfs, it wouldn't really change much, because, like, even if we brought back Zar and Brahma to, like, their pre-nerf states from an ammo economy perspective, I don't even think they'd be that popular in the modern meta because of how good things like Incarnins are. Holy shit. Okay, that's all of them. I really underestimated just how much I was gonna have to say in this video, and to be honest, I don't even know if it's that coherent. At the time I'm recording this, it's 11:30 at night, and so, like, it's kind of late. I think I might be at the point where my brain is, like, a little too shot to even record something like this. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe this all sucked. Maybe this video was dog shit. Maybe I'm going to look in the comments when it's posted and just see a never-ending sea of death threats. And, you know, maybe they'd be warranted even. I'm not even sure. But it really is hard for me to say just how coherent this video even was. I guess when I'm editing it and whatnot, I'll make that, you know, judgment for myself. Editing this audio is gonna fucking suck, though. I can tell that already. But yeah, if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for sitting through this much of this video. I did not expect this to go on for this long. I have no idea why I thought this was a good idea. I think that I really need to just, like, rein in the scope of this series, I guess. It's clear that, like, the more that I do it, the more I have to say, and it leads to things just getting excessively long. So, again, if you've made it this far, thank you. I'm sorry that I took up so much of your time. Well, while we're here, I do want to talk a little bit about sort of future content plans. This will be a little reward for those of you that are still listening right now. So, I've been working on the Super Boss guides recently. I did the ones for the Guilty, and the one for Giannis 4. I do want to finish those, but those videos perform like shit. They do terrible. So, I'm putting a little bit of a hold on them. I want to try and release a couple other things first, and then I'll try and round out the super boss guides. I do have all my notes taken for the tank, but I don't want to make it next. So I've mentioned this on stream, but I want to sort of pursue some other ideas I have. I'm currently working on a video script about different individual cases of things that I think are balanced in a bizarre way. Like I mentioned earlier, Revenant's thralls kind of fail at their gimmick because he can kill them on accident. That's sort of a topic I want to talk about in the video, as well as things like Atlas's rubble not giving him armor if it heals him, which discourages him from using the armor bonus that his rubble provides him in the first place, or Heat Inherit being able to screw over your damage if an ability applies the heat proc first, which means that like Ember and Uriel and Temple can get screwed out of their own damage bonuses by using their abilities, stuff like that. That'll probably be the next thing, implying that something else doesn't like take up my current fixation and it doesn't get made until later, but that's kind of the focus I want to pursue. Also, I did make a community tab post about a Lavos guide I was working on, and many people have been asking me, where the hell is that? It is being written, just to make it clear that has not been abandoned, but that video is going to be like at least an hour and a half long. I have a lot of shit I want to say, and I want it to be as comprehensive as possible. So, it is being worked on, but working on a project of that magnitude is really hard when this is my job, because that's time I'm not releasing something. So, I do want to do it, it's just going to be really long, so I don't really know for sure when it will come out. But yeah, beyond all that, thank you again for watching. I'm sorry there is no homosexual story at the end of this one. People keep telling me I should do another story about Nitro and I like I did in episode 2, but again, you gotta give me more material to work with, right? Tell me some hot take that I can work into things, right? Give me a hot take that's like gay sex is mid. Okay, you know, then I've got something to work with. But yeah, thank you again for watching. I'm sorry this video was this fucking long, and I'll see y'all next time.